So today we're going to be taking a look at the Z370 Ultra Gaming 2. Now 2, it's the second version because the first version wasn't very good. But I'm going to tell you right now, the issue is the second version isn't any better. If anything, it's worse. Get comfy because this is going to be a long and painful one. I'm a bit worried about Gigabyte. So yeah, the little kind of intro thing kind of gives you an idea about what's going on. I am going to try and put some timestamps for you underneath, and I do have to do this in the old school way where I show you live testing and keep cutting the camera to show you as well, because I have a lot of points that I do need to get across. The other reason why I do need to film everything so that you can see it's kind of live, and I'm not just putting screenshots on because I've put days of testing into this, is the fact that if we're filming it on camera, then there's no possible way that, you know, things can get argued about. The other reason is, with all due respect, Gigabyte are going to spend a lot of time picking this video apart, so I need to try and make sure that I get every possible bit of information in, including all the possible different variables, versions of Prime that I'm using, voltages that I'm using. I've got a little thermometer out so that I can show you ambient temps as well. And the critical thing is that you can see the system running by the side all the time, because I do have some rather bad news about the Ultra Gaming 2. So the first one, I wasn't really a big fan about. It had some big issues with memory for starters. So what was happening is the board was slackening the memory timings off quite considerably, so that when you placed them in a memory benchmark graph, the board never did seem to graph very well at all. Also, because of the way that they worked with their memory, you could, for argument's sake, be trying to get 3600 run, and it might boot at 3200 one boot and 3400 the next. It was kind of all over the place. Now I do have to give you all of this information to give you the background, so that you don't necessarily have to go and watch the whole old video before, and then I'll explain to you about what's going on with this one. So I wasn't, you know, very happy about that, and where it was kind of a bit of a letdown because it should have been working better. But the biggest thing was really the VRMs, and the VRMs were quite easy to get to overheat. Now, what's happened is they've not actually added any MOSFETs or anything extra in on the Ultra Gaming 2. They've added an extra choke and an extra capacitor per MOSFET. So they've changed the phase a little bit, but you've still got the same amount of MOSFETs basically. So they've done that, and they've done that, and if you look around the similar priced Asus and MSI boards, essentially that's the way the Asus and MSI boards are set out. So you have a single MOSFET, and then you've got a couple of chokes and a couple of caps. So it's pretty clear that they've kind of looked around at the other boards and kind of gone, we'll just do what everybody else is doing. The problem is it hasn't really worked. And I will show you some, so we're going to be using Prime to test the VRMs, but also with a more real world kind of thing, we're going to be using Blender as well. Now we do have our own custom version of Blender, but it's just a load of OC3D logos, as you'll see shortly. And there are quite a lot of polygons there, if I'm honest, but it's, at the end of the day, it's Blender. It's open source. You can do whatever you kind of want with it. There are lots of other programs and stuff, or, you know, you can download your own files and stuff. I think our like base file for one of them is about 750 meg, so it is kind of big, but it puts a decent amount of stress on. We can normally get a good 30-minute run out of the 4K one with a half decent CPU, so it's a good way to kind of like test everything. Anyway, so we're going to be doing all of that, and essentially my aim to show you today is basically discuss the issues with the memory, because one of the things was a lot of the Z370 boards were easily capable of 4000 megahertz. 3866 for some of the cheap ones, but most of the decent branded boards that were around the £200 mark were hitting 4000 relatively easy. Now Gigabyte did say to me, because something I do need to kind of let you know as well, it's because I wasn't that enthused about the board in the first place, I've actually been actively emailing and helping Gigabyte with my local representative on this for months. It's been a long time coming. The delay of us getting to this point, from the point of it actually being even available for sale, has been their HQ trying to tweak things so that it would look better for the review. Now you might be thinking to yourself, well, that's not really very fair, but I'm very, very careful about the fact that I won't review anything, especially after launch, if the BIOS isn't available on the public website. Now, I do that because in my eyes, I'm then trying to help all of you at home end up with a better product. You might not notice, but I notice certain little things that I then go back to them and try and get them to sort out. Now, there's been quite a few bits and bobs. Like, for example, they knew exactly what memory I was using, because I sent them the literally pictures of the sticks with the serial numbers and everything, so that they could then get the memory sticks in and pretty much make sure the BIOS would work with it. Now, it's only Corsair LPX, so it's nothing like extravagant or anything like that. It's relatively easy to get your hands on. But this is really the first part where things then started to look wrong, and it was one of the first things when I first started my testing that started setting alarm bells off. But we'd had such a big delay, like it was 6 to 8 weeks of delay for them to get that sorted, that when I first saw this, I went straight back to Gigabyte and I was like, I've noticed some hinky stuff going on here. And let's face it, I'm one of the few people that's actually doing these sort of reviews and this kind of depth to pick up on tiny little things that if they're happy for it to come to me, then things must be right. Sadly, it wasn't, which I'll show you with now. Okay, so we've got our system running here. It's my literal standard motherboard test rig. That's a GTX 980 in there. I'm still using that because it means that we can link all the graphs together. You've got a Corsair H110 GT in the top. The memory that we've got in there at the moment is my 4000 megahertz Corsair LPX. You'll see why in a sec. And then you've got the Corsair RMI power supply in the background. These are all of their ML fans, so there are 5 ML 140 fans. They are all on 100% as well, I might add, for the airflow. I've got the side off the case for the minute just so that we can kind of see in there better. And the ambient room temperature at the moment is 22.3. It's quite warm in the UK at the moment, but it's obviously going to get a little bit warmer because of the fact that the system is going to be running. And we are in the BIOS, and you can see that we're running at stock. Don't forget, you can pause at any point, put your video on full screen, do you know what I mean? So you can cover it, you can follow me with this. And all I'm going to do is I'm going to go down here, and we're going to go to Extreme Memory Profile, XMP, go to Profile 1, and you can see it's gone up to 40 because we're going to go to 4000 megahertz. I'm then going to press F10 and I'm going to save it. It's all the normal sort of stuff that you would expect. It's all good. I'm going to wait for the system to boot, and then I'm going to go back into the BIOS to show you something. I'm hoping with the fact that, yeah, we are going back into the BIOS, so this is all good. Advanced memory settings. So we can see here 4000 megahertz, lovely. We can see the profile DDR voltage is 1.35 volts. That's all nice and good. If we go into advanced voltage settings and go down to DRAM voltage control, you can see it's saying here auto and 1.2 volts. The other thing that we kind of need to go and look at are really the VCC IO and the system agent voltages. These are also saying auto, but if you have a look, they're registering at 0.95 and 1.05. But what I'm going to do is we're going to go to Windows, or let it go into Windows, just so that I can show you a few of the voltages in there. I may move the camera for you as well. Okay, so we're zoomed in quite a bit. So what we're going to do is we're going to open CPU-Z, which if you've ever been to any of the seminars that I do, it's the first thing we do for everything. We're going to go and check the memory. So here it says 2000 megahertz, but you double it up. And you double it up, DDR double data rate, so we know that's running at 4000. So that's good, we've got that sorted. Then we'll open a hardware monitor. Now I'm going to do this because we're going to go and look for a voltage. It's starting up just off the screen. It takes a little while. But again, I'm trying to do this live just so that I can cover a few points. I'm probably going to edit around it anyway. Okay, so the voltage that we need to take note of here is this one. It's VIN6 1.416. So what we're going to do is the memory voltage should be 1.35. The XMP profile is registered as being 1.35. Okay, so you can see there you've got the 1.4 volt. There is a 1.35 volt above it, which is volt 5. But what we're going to do is we're going to concentrate on that VIN6. Okay, so I'm going to go into the BIOS now, just to go and manually set our memory voltages. So we're going to go down to voltage settings, DRAM voltage control. You can see there it's on auto. So what I'm going to do is set it to 1.35, F10 and out. I'm literally just doing this to prove to you that they've ignored the XMP profile and turned the memory voltage up to 1.4 volts. Okay, so back into Windows, open hardware monitor. Now you need to remember this was done with a memory kit that they knew I had specifically. The memory kit runs absolutely fine at 1.3 volts, I might add. It does not need 1.4 volts. Okay, so what we can do here is we go back to that VIN6 that I showed you before. And this is why I've done this all live. You can now see VIN6 is 1.344. So that is our memory voltage. So I've now manually set that to 1.35. So that is correct. So what that shows you is even though Gigabyte knew that I had this, they've turned the memory voltage up to try and get it working. But our biggest issue here is quite strangely, okay, so they've ignored that and they've just turned the volts up. That's not going to make the board work any better with it. But my issue with this at this point is they've ignored the VCC I/O and the system agent voltages completely. And the board isn't auto turning those volts up to be able to run 4000 megahertz. So although we are in this Windows system at the moment, this system isn't completely stable. And you have to turn the VCC I/O volts up and the system agent voltage up to get it completely stable. So the BIOS engineer, all his version of getting this done was to plumb the timings in and then turn the volts up a little bit. That's their way of getting it working, but it's that they've clearly not tested it properly, because if I was to run any of the benchmarks now, it would literally fall over. So I've now got to manually set up the VCC I/O volts and the system agent voltages for us to be able to even get this stable with a stock CPU just to get running 4000 megahertz memory. Now you might think I'm being a bit pedantic about this, and you might think, oh, well, 4000 megahertz, you know, it's a big call. You don't even have to turn those VCC I/O volts and the system agent voltages up that much. This board is actually capable of it. Right, so 4000 megahertz memory at stock CPUs. I can turn the lights on so you can see me a little bit better. It actually works absolutely fine. I set the system agent voltage to 1.2 volts. I set the system VCC I/O to 1.25. It runs fine. It will pass prime. That's absolutely fine. So we've now got to the point where we know that it works right. And if you want to go and have a look at the written review on the OC3D website, I did run through some tests. It wasn't as quick as some of the other 4000s in the graph, but it wasn't because it had been pushed a little bit too high, because I turned those back to like 3866 and 3600, and we got a good step back in performance for every run, so we know we hadn't pushed things too far. But first thing, we got 4000 megahertz running. It just needed manual intervention. That was even though the BIOS engineers knew exactly what memory kit I was going to be using, and it's all a bit kind of iffy. But now we really need to start talking about overclocks and VRMs, and I already need to change my camera battery. Okay, so we've got a fresh system, and I'm going to load optimize default. So we're turning the 4000 megahertz memory off now, and we're going to go back and we're going to start fresh. So advanced frequency settings, we're going to go down here. You can see that the memory multiplier, this will come off, it's not going to be on. I'll show you when we go into Windows. So we're going to turn that to 50, so for a 5 gigahertz overclock. Voltage settings, advanced power settings, we need to go in here and turn the load line calibration up to turbo. And just so that you know, I've done a lot of testing with this, so I know what settings I need to be put in to get this to pass. Please remember, at home, yours may not work with this. Your different motherboard, you could have the exact same kit and it might not work, or you might be putting too many volts in. You may have a better CPU than me, you may have a worse CPU than me. It's called the silicon lottery. So please, you can use these as a guide, but you do need to put the extra work in. Remember, the voltages are what create the most heat. So we're going to go in and I'm going to put 1.31 volts in. I can get most of the tests to pass at 1.3. I need 1.31 for Blender. So we're going to put that in. You can also see down here the VCC IO and the system agent voltages are now back to auto because we've turned the memory off. And then we can go back out of here. We don't need to change the chipset. DRAM, you can see that's on auto as well. So it's just about the 5 gigahertz CPU only overclock, and we'll exit and go to Windows. Now, when we do get to Windows, I'm going to open hardware monitor, hardware info, and we're going to run Prime 26.6, and I'll explain to you the difference between the two. I'm filling in the gaps of this posting so that there is one continuous video feed, so you know that we've gone exactly from the BIOS settings you've seen me put in into a working version of Windows. So we're going to go through this, and this is more for Gigabyte's benefit. But also it means that I've not changed anything specifically to hide a voltage I've turned up or anything like that. But we'll go to hardware monitor or HW monitor. This takes a little while to load. The others are all actually much quicker, which makes life a little bit easier, and I don't have to waffle in between so much. I'm still here, look. Ooh. And this is literally just again so that you can see the whole process. Okay, so we're going to turn the utilization off. I'm going to drag this down. We don't need to see the powers. The only reason why I'm closing some of these is just so that we can get the clocks down at the bottom, and that's just to make sure that we're not getting any throttling. This board seems to just turn off though, rather than throttle. So we're going to open CPU Z so we can see 1.308 volts. I'm going to show you the memory just quickly. You can see it's 1066 now, not 2000, so that's basically 2133. Now we're going to open hardware info. Okay, thank you very much. So we move that over there. We're going to go right to the very bottom, and I'm just going to highlight that because this is a critical one for us to take a look at. So you can see we've got a VRM MOSFET. You can also see underneath the V core, so that's 1.308 volts, and that matches up with the voltage that we have showing in CPU Z. And then if we look at the top of hardware monitor as well, you can see they all match. So the most important one for us on this one is going to be VRM. Now I'm going to run Prime 26.6. You can see if I move these down a little bit, there's Prime 26.6, that's what we'd call the real world test. It's the one that most of you should be using. 28.1 actually adds AVX instructions in. 29.2 adds AVX 512 instructions in. So this is the easiest one. This is pretty hard. This is silly hard, especially with an Intel CPU that have a specific AVX section on the die. So we're going to stick with the easier one. Now we're also then going to click small FFTs. So when you open Prime, it gives you 4 options. You've got small FFTs, in place large FFTs, blend or custom. We're going for small FFTs, and this was the test that I was running when I was absolutely beasting the Asus Strix Z370 boards not so long ago, and also with all of the issues with X299 and the VRM problems that people were having with X299. That was also done with this exact one. Now I know some people may say this is a benchmark, this is worst case scenario. This is just the first test that I'm going to be showing you, because I will be showing you a Blender result as well, but we're going to leave this to run. Now the most important thing that we need to say here while we're looking at this is on hardware info. I'm not going to zero it off. You can see that it's basically saying 2 minutes. So we started it all fairly quickly after that. In fact, I'll tell you what we'll do, just to make people happier. We'll stop Prime and we'll have that ready. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to zero everything off, and then literally the second that I hit that, I'm now going to start this. So everything's roughly about right. We'll ignore the minimum value for the VRM temperatures because it's already run a little bit, but we've now got Prime running and we have a clock down here, so we know how long Prime's been running on this instant. It will keep pausing because of the amount of load that's being put on the CPU, but what we can also do is we can look down here at the time down here as well, so everything can tie in together. Now what I will do is I'm going to leave this running and I will come back when we go over 100 degrees on the VRMs. You need to remember this is just a CPU only clock now. We do not have that 4000 megahertz memory in play, and we'll just see how long it takes for us to get to 100 degrees on the VRMs. Just a quick cut in. Ambient room temperature is 22.8 degrees, and the system that we're running is you've got 5 Corsair ML140 fans in there. They are running at 100%. They're wired up to a Molex. They are running on absolute maximum speed. So that's not the sort of thing that you're going to have in there. It's being housed in a Corsair Air 540. You've got the Gigabyte board. You've got a Corsair H110i GT. It's one of the so it's a 140mm version in the top. So we've got really good cooling available for the CPU. It's going to be getting relatively warm. We're going to be, with this CPU specifically, we're going to be up in the kind of like mid to upper 80s at this point. But this is a stress test about the VRMs more than anything else. And just for a quick update, what we can see already is after 2 minutes we are at 87 degrees. Now don't forget, when it comes to the case, you've got the 140mm fan in the back, and then you have the 2 140mm in the roof that are on 100%. So I think they're doing 1800 RPM. They're making quite a bit of noise. If I was to get my microphone in there, I could show you. So we've not got any direct airflow as in like a fan blowing on here, but amazingly, if we were to use an air cooler, and I have tried an air cooler, it actually makes the temperatures worse, because what then happens is the CPU ends up getting hotter and you end up getting heat sink, or heat soak I should say. So having an air fan here doesn't actually end up helping the cooler at all, because you've got quite a large bit of plastic covering the top of the cooler there. So the only way that we can drop the VRM temps is literally with a direct fan blowing straight over the top, like a downdraft fan. It's very similar to the problems I was having with their B350 ITX board. And while I'm filming for you here now, we're at 3 minutes and 20 seconds indicated, and we're already at 93 degrees. I am going to stop filming now and I will come back when we get to 100. Okay peeps, so we've got 5 minutes 13 indicated. We are at 99 degrees. I actually wanted you to be able to see it flick over to 100. because there we go. And then so you can see here 5:35 indicated. I show you the times before. It's all linked in now. So we've got to 100 degrees. Now, one thing I do want to say is with other boards at 105 degrees indicated VRM temps, and I do mean both MSI and Asus, the board would turn itself off. It would do a thermal shutdown, or it would then throttle the bejesus out of the cores. So it would then it would power everything down. It would downclock itself to like 3.4 gigahertz, or sometimes even like 800 megahertz. But it would do a massive throttle, or it would literally just do a thermal shut off. That's at 105 degrees. Well, I'm going to leave this running. We're at 6 minutes now, as I've shown you before. I've tied everything in. I'm literally going to leave this running now. I'm going to go and make a cup of tea, because these poor VRMs are going to roast. So just a quick update. First update, I've made myself a cup of tea. In that time that I've made a cup of tea, so we are now at an indicated 11 minutes. Okay, it's just flicked over to 12 minutes. We are at 112 degrees on the VRMs. And just for the sake of fairness, we can check the clocks. You can all do your maths, because it's all the same run. And yeah, 112 degrees and still climbing after 12 minutes. So after 20 minutes, well, nearly 21 minutes indicated, we've actually got a maximum temperature of 116 degrees, but it's showing 115 at the moment. It's flickering between the two. Now, if we leave it for the full 30 minutes, sometimes it goes up a little bit more, sometimes it doesn't. We normally get to about 120, 122 with it like this. But what I'm going to do is I'm just going to, you can see the time, I'm just going to do the validation so that you can see it all, and you can see it's all still there. The volts have actually been relatively good, so I'm not too fussed about that, but it's more the fact that we've had 20 minutes of prime. Now, what I do have to do is give this a chance to cool down, because it would be unfair for me to now just put Blender on. So I'm essentially, we're going to show this now, we're going to watch, I'm going to zero it off, because what's happening now, and the reason why I've zeroed it off, is we've set a time, but the most important thing here is we've now got a minimum temperature of well, 92, and you can see it coming down. The maximum was 109. Now it's going to come down. I'm going to wait until it gets to 50 degrees. I'm going to show you guys again, and then we're going to run Blender. So it's the OC3D Blender, but I'll talk to you about that when this has cooled down a little bit. Okay everyone, so we've now got our VRM temps down below 50 degrees, so I'm happy with that. What I'm going to do is I am going to zero off our clock, and then I'm going to open Blender. Now this is the OC3D Blender file. It's a huge file, but it's one of the ones that we've initiated as a part of our tests. It normally takes about 30 minutes, but I'm going to hit F12 to start it off. And then what I'm also going to then do is I'm just going to overlay the hardware info so that we've got a time. I'm going to zero the time off again, and then our VRMs are basically, they've just clicked into 50 degrees. We've got a minimum of 50, and now the VRM temps are climbing rather quickly. I'm going to move it over a little bit just so that you can see it is actually rendering. We'll go that way. So we're using Blender, and this is just a secondary test. That's obviously not a harsh benchmark. This is more of a real world test that we're going to let this run, and we'll also be able to see the temps at the end of it. Now, like I said, it takes about 30 minutes to finish, but if I see anything interesting as it's starting to do it temperature wise, I'll come back in so that we can see the clocks. And just for verification again, we can see down there, but also with Blender it does have a time up on that corner, so we'll be able to see the amount of time it took, and then we'll be able to tie it all together. And again, just to reiterate, I'm doing this just so that Gigabyte can see all the times. They can see it's, you know, there's nothing hinky going on, and I'm just validating all of my temperature results and the amount of times things are taking. Okay, so just to have a zoom in, we can see that we're over 10 minutes. Our VRMs are now over 100 degrees, 104 degrees. You can see that we're running over 10 minutes on the blender, but we did start blender before we reset the timer for hardware info. And we can also double check with the times on the actual system itself. So we're 10 minutes in blender, and we're already at 100 and over 100 degrees. It's not far off 105 degrees now. We've obviously got a little bit longer to go yet. So we're 25 minutes in, and the VRMs we've got rather warm. We've still got a little bit more time to go. I reckon we probably got, I think it's saying we've got like another 7 minutes or so left. And just for a validation, you can see the times down there, so it all links in. Okay, so blender has just finished. So we can see there that we've got 33.5 minutes basically showing on hardware info. There's our time there. And then we can go up and we can see the completed time up there. Now, what we can see while looking at this one with a jangly camera is we did get a maximum of 123 degrees on our VRMs during the run for blender, which we know took just over 33 minutes, 33.5 minutes. CPU temps, not really too bad, 81 degrees, but that VRM temperature is the one that we need to take the notice of most. And we also need to remember this is a blender test. This isn't a stressful benchmark. This isn't anything that you could say is a worst case scenario, because it's not a stress test. This is a program that people use to render their designs at home, and it's a very widely used program as well. So I'm just covering those points, and you can see the temperatures that we've got to. Okie dokie, so very long-winded, I apologise, but I've already explained at the start why I needed to cover all of the bases so that you guys at home knew what was going on, but also so that Gigabyte can see exactly how I'm doing my testing. So we're going to recap. The VRMs, it's for an overclock. And I think if you're going to be buying an 8700K, then and you're going to overclock, most people, if they're going to overclock, they're going to be aiming for that hallowed 5 gigahertz. 1.31 volts isn't that bad either in the grand scheme of things. Some people at home may get their CPUs, get lucky with a CPU and be able to run lower volts. If you run lower volts, then it will mean it will pull less power. So this is only really going to be if you're running around the sort of 1.31 mark. But the point is that the VRMs are just getting too hot. The only way that we've been able to stop them getting so hot is turn the overclock down and drive the volts right down as well. We can get Blender to pass with a 4.9 gigahertz overclock at just over 100 degrees. But to put things into context, just so that you are aware, if we were to use one of the competitors' boards with these tests, the worst case scenario would be about 80. So there is a huge, huge difference between this and the competition. So that's one of the reasons why I needed to draw attention to this, because this is the second time that they've had a crack at getting this board sorted. And if you want 5 gigahertz, this is not the board for you. Absolutely not. And I'm going on record with saying that as well. I would also personally, considering that even at 4.9 we're getting 100 degrees on the VRMs, if you're just going to be gaming, then it's really not going to make a great deal of difference. But if you're the type of person that is a content creator, you might be transcoding videos for a home collection or rendering YouTube videos, lots of Photoshop or anything maybe to do with 3D content creation. So anything that's going to require a lot of CPU power, and you're going to be running an overclock as well, I would actually say this is not the board for you at all. Now this has been on sale for quite a while, and I would also go on record as saying, if you've bought one of these boards and you didn't know about your VRMs, you can see the programs I've been using. If you have overclocked, I would give it a look. If you're getting in your system at any point with one of the programs that I'm using here over 100 degrees, and it is possible, but can be variables between, where your case fans are, what cooler that you've got, all of that sort of thing. But if you're putting a lot of load on your system for any length of time and your VRMs are getting over 100 degrees, I'm actually again going to go on record as to say I think you should probably be looking at sending the board back and looking at other options. Now, you could make your other option something like the Gaming 7 from Gigabyte, for example. I'm not telling you, and I have to be very clear about this because I'm pretty sure there's going to be lawyers going to be watching this video at some point. I do have to be very clear, I'm not telling you not to buy a Gigabyte board, but you need to make sure that the VRMs are going to be able to cope with the load that you want to put on it. And as I've said, if you're a content creator, you're going to be putting a lot of system load on, banging out Blender renders, or maybe you're a benchmarker and stuff, and you want to make sure that your system is going to be running at the absolute optimum that it can be, this isn't going to be the one for you. Or at least with the testing that I've showed you today, I don't think it is. Now, this is where I go into a little bit of a speculation, because I'm a little bit worried about Gigabyte, because not only did this go through some kind of design manager somewhere where they decided from, speculating, they've pretty much gone and looked at the competition and, they're running an extra cap and a choke, so we'll do that. Okay, do that. I don't think it was tested after that point though. And not only did this, there's been a delay because this board has been out for quite a while. So there's been a delay where they were trying to make sure that the board was going to be ready for me, because they were a little bit concerned about me testing it. That they've then, it's now got to me in this state, and it took me bringing these points up because one of the other things is, I've been talking to Gigabyte about this for a little while, and they have confirmed, yes, this is an edit in, but Gigabyte have confirmed that the BIOS was setting the memory voltage to 1.4 volt rather than 1.3 volt and ignoring setting the other voltages instead, which is obviously not great for the memory being overvolted like that. And as I have shown in the video, it doesn't actually need to be at 1.4 volts either. The other thing is they have confirmed that the VRM temperatures are getting higher than I deem to be acceptable, as again I've shown in the video. So the thing that I'm kind of leaving you with is it took me to tell them what was wrong with it for them then to realise. So they now know about it and they've gone, yeah, they are hot. Our testing is saying hot. So why wasn't this done before? Why has it taken me to do this for them? And that, they've now replicated it. And the other thing I'm very, very concerned about, because how can this be sold to the public in this state? It's not a cheap board. It's not a £100 board. It's a £200 board. It's not a quick board, and it's a redesign board, and they redesigned it because they knew they had VRM issues in the first place. So they changed the VRMs, and if anything, they've made it worse. I don't understand what's going on. Now, I have had several issues with Gigabyte over the last few years about VRM issues specifically and them getting too hot, to the point now where I'm very, very concerned about the brand and its reputation now. Because I would honestly say there are a lot of people that are going to have gone and bought this board and bought it because it's got a Gigabyte logo on it, and you're going to assume that it's going to be a decent quality. And I don't think they deserve that kind of reputation anymore. I genuinely think we're at a point with Gigabyte where we're at a pivot point in their as a company as a whole, where things need to change. There are people that have worked on this board, I would genuinely say, for them to have let it not only be designed and then not tested internally properly, but then sent out for sale to the public, and then to also send it to one of the, if not the only media that's going to pick up issues with it, that they then, there are people that need sacking. Whoever designed this, you know what I mean, you clearly don't know what you're on about, fella, because if you're building boards like this and then not following it up and getting stuff tested, whoever was in charge of getting this board to market literally needs to be hoofed out of the company, because it's not fit for purpose. If you mention a decent overclock, which with a board like this, with a brand like this, and you know, with a price like this as well, and then also, and this is the worst bit, and then also knowing that the previous one was so bad, that person needs to be chucked out of the company, because they clearly don't care enough about their job. It feels to me like the thing that they're doing the most at the moment is just going, oh, we'll just do what everybody else is doing. Gigabyte used to make some absolutely outstanding products. And over the last few years, things have dropped to a point where I would say that, as far as I'm concerned, Gigabyte doesn't even deserve to be in the top 3 manufacturers at the moment. And I would easily rate MSI and ASRock above Gigabyte at the moment. As far as BIOS is concerned, 100% they deserve to be below MSI and ASRock. Because little things like the XMP profile, for example, and the fact that they didn't set the VCCIO up, whoever the guy was in charge of the BIOS for this, he's another one that clearly needs to be hoofed out, because it just shows a complete lack of giving a monkeys, really. I nearly swore. But I'm genuinely really worried about them at this point. And the problem is now is we've had far too many problems with VRMs and Gigabyte and BIOS not working properly. If they've not got enough resources in-house, they need to get more resources in, because their reputation is quite quickly being drained away by people getting bored and not, you know, wanting to take a risk anymore. And the fact that this is available for sale like this, and they, like I said, they knew where it was coming, they knew what was going to happen, they sent it to me specifically despite knowing the memory that I had, and you know, it should literally, they got given every possible chance to make this the best that they possibly could do, and even really simple things just weren't done correctly. So do I think it's a board that is worth buying for overclocking? Not at all. The VRMs are not up to spec for that. The BIOS with the 4000 megahertz, as you've seen, I had to manually set it up. That's not necessarily such a bad thing, because you can quite often need to do that anyway. 4000 megahertz is a big stretch, but the fact that it even run at all is actually a good thing. But the problem is that I did have to manually do it, despite the fact that it should have pretty much been tailored for me. So it is capable, but it's being let down. It's been let down by the bloke that thought just adding a cap and a choke was going to make a great deal of difference. It really hasn't. And I don't really think that it deserves this kind of 2 on the end either, because they may have done a little bit on it, but it's still kind of massively lacking. And I know it's harsh, but I would genuinely say that after this review, if you're going to be running sort of like 4.9, 5 gigahertz, and like I said, you're a content creator, I think you've got a good enough reason to go and get your money back with this board, because it's definitely not up to the standards for the amount of money you've invested into it. If you're just gaming and you're worried about that sort of thing, set your volts up manually, make sure you've done that. Make sure you play around with your load line calibration. If you're running 3200 megahertz or anything like that, then you can just XMP it, it'll be fine. The board will run absolutely fine for you people. It only really becomes an issue with the VRMs with extended periods of aggressive load. As I said, that's going to be content creators, people doing 3D work, people that are doing long video edits. If you're doing 4K videos for YouTube or something like that, that's absolutely going to blast your system to bits. They're all the types of load that you're going to have issues with. Or with like Blender, or if you do like to get Prime 95 out to test your tests, that's going to absolutely hound your VRMs. Now, the thing that I do have to be very clear as I recap, if you were to be using a competitor board, and it doesn't matter which one that you'd be doing, you'd be getting a drop of around 30 to 40 degrees less on your VRMs. Now, One of the things I do need to say, and this is something that I personally still don't agree with, was when I first picked up about the original Ultra Gaming overheating, basically what was happening at 105 degrees, it was turning itself off. And it was turning itself off because of a thermal limit. And then what Gigabyte's answer to that was to turn the thermal limit up to 125 degrees instead. Now that temperature at 125 degrees is a thermal probe between the VRMs. The actual VRMs will probably be running at around 135 or 140 degrees at that point. So what they're actually doing by letting you have a 125 degrees limit with the probe that's in between them is technically running them out of spec as well. They will be overheating at that point. You do not want your VRMs with the probes that we have available to be running anywhere close to 120 degrees, which is why the other two brands cap them at 105. So it's all bad news, I'm afraid, with this. I genuinely think this is one to miss. I wouldn't really, if you're looking at buying a new board, I wouldn't recommend this board at all whatsoever. And I just feel a little bit sorry for any of you that have already spent money on it. So with this, it's a bit of a bombshell, and I've not said that for a while, but yeah, big video, big conclusion.